All right, March means March Madness, means brackets. We love brackets. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast. We got a doozy for you today.
And I'm Jon Scott. It certainly is. The reaction on social media has been fun. I'll say that. I've had some really nice discussions surrounding our final bracket here, the Bills' best ever draft picks. I put it out on social media on Monday, the bracket of 16, which we will reveal here on the show shortly. But seeding was a question. One guy in particular. The matchups then, in turn, had some interesting things. So we're going to go through on social media as we're taping this on Thursday. We're into the final four for what I've put out for you guys to vote. And those are pretty much decisive matchups and outcomes already, as we're only a few hours in, and I don't necessarily see those changing. So we will probably just forecast into Friday what the final championship matchup will be in the Bills Mafia bracket, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kevin, I think your favorite comment towards me was I should go to Serbia or Siberia.
Siberia, you're still here. I'm glad you're still here. I thought you might have just took that and went, all right, I'm out.
Multiple, this is criminal, things like that. So this is our opportunity because I responded to some people, but I didn't want to give away everything. So Kevin and I collaborated on the bracket of 16. We're going to explain who we picked, why we picked them, why we seeded them the way that we did. We did have some disagreements and different names we thought should maybe backfill the final four spots. So we will discuss those who are on the other side of the bubble. We'll go through how the matchups fared over on the social media realm. And honestly, that's what I tell people, Kevin. It's fun.
Yes.
These sorts of discussions are fun because you may say, there is a wrong answer, but in reality, there really isn't. And it's also just fun, even though this team is so good, and I know for so many years this is kind of the world Bills Mafia fans lived in, was always looking back to the glory days of the past. But I do think it's a fun exercise to appreciate truly how great this organization and franchise has been in terms of some incredible football players.
Yeah, and that's what it all came down to with us when we were going. I mean, you do have to take the team from the early 90s for what it is. One of the greatest football teams that were ever out there, and put aside what you're seeing right now from the current Bills, realizing that if you live in the now, which I'm guilty of, John, I do it all the time with everything under the sun, from food to movies to football teams and football players, because what happened most recently sticks in your mind. The other thing we have to take into consideration is when you and I put this together, it was careers of players drafted by the Bills. It was not so much as, well, he was a pick that lived up to the hype, but this guy was a pick that was picked later in the draft who I don't want to say overcame, but did a lot more than you would expect from a later round draft pick.
100%. So there's one matchup that went a direction I didn't anticipate it going, although I wasn't completely surprised, from the fan side of things, that we'll release in the bracket in the opening round. And I think I ended up reasoning it because this particular player was a fifth-round draft pick who ultimately was a six-time Pro Bowler, where the other guy, even though they made the Hall of Fame, they were a first-round pick. Mm-hmm. So who lived up to the hype? Someone asked me about Stevie Johnson, because I asked early on for people's ideas of who they think should be on the bracket, and someone said Stevie Johnson as a seventh-round pick absolutely should be in the bracket. Now, if you and I, the creators of the bracket, had decided that the criteria and focus of this was going to be taking into account their draft position and ultimately their accomplishments, a guy like Stevie Johnson, a guy like Matt Milano, some of these guys certainly would have made the cut. But that's not how we were envisioning it. That's not what our mindset was. So that'll answer maybe some of the questions for maybe why some of the decisions we made, either who's in, who's out, who we picked to win in advance in the bracket, because that is where you and I are unified in our feelings of the way we are viewing and interpreting this.
Right. And I saw Marshawn Lynch's name mentioned a few times, too. He had a good career with Seattle. I mean, he was a Bills draft pick, but, the only thing that I remember from him as a Buffalo Bill was him stealing a waitress's tip over at a Chili's or a Ruby Tuesdays or something. John, let's reveal the bracket right now. I'll go through it and set things up off of my bracket. And number 1 overall, Bruce Smith versus 16, Deion Dawkins. We have Josh Allen, an 8 seed, versus Reuben Brown, a 9 seed. Josh Allen at number 8 has been a big concern for people. 4 seed, Billy Shaw versus 13, Butch Bird. 5 seed, Thurman Thomas versus number 12, Darryl Talley. 2, Jim Kelly. 15, Joe Ferguson. 7 seed, Joe DeLamalure versus 10 seed, Kyle Williams. 3 seed, O.J. Simpson. 14th seed, Eric Moulds. And then 6, Andre Reed. And 11, Fred Smerlis, John. So obviously some names left off of that bracket, but when you and I brainstormed, this is what we came up with for the most competitive bracket we had going.
So here are some of the guys we compromised for the final few spots here.
Yeah.
I think we had 12 locks.
Yeah.
And then the final 4 were kind of, how are we going to round this out? Some guys that did not make the cut that I compromised to leave out that I had in consideration. Aaron Schobel, 2nd-round pick in 2001. One time he made the second-team All-Pro. He made 2 Pro Bowls, but he's second in franchise history in sacks with 78. So to me, again, I'm looking at their career with the Buffalo Bills. If you're second in any statistical category or that high up or leading it, I think you should be at least considered in there. It was a fine compromise that we left him out.
Yeah.
Shane Conlon, 1st-round pick in 1987. He was Defensive Rookie of the Year and a 3-time second-team All-Pro, made 3 Pro Bowls as well. That's pretty good, right? I mean, to me, the 2 lists that I was telling Kevin this before he went on that I was referencing when making my decisions and going through this, Pro Football Reference had 2 pages, one of just the Bills' all-time draft, and it breaks it down where it shows you how many first-team All-Pros they made, how many Pro Bowls, and how many years they were the starter. And then I also just went to the Bills' all-time list of All-Pro selections versus Pro Bowl selections. It's interesting here. The All-Pro first team, we obviously understand that means you are the very best at your position specifically in a particular season. So it shouldn't surprise you. There's not a whole lot of guys that have been a first-team All-Pro or certainly been multiple times. So that's where, if you make an All-Pro list, that's what kind of elevates me. One other guy that I didn't bring into the conversation, but I just want to note is Mike Stratton was a linebacker back in the early 60s, like maybe one of the very first drafts. In 1962, he was a 13th-round pick. 3-time first-team All-Pro. One time he won second-team All-Pro and was a 6-time Pro Bowler. Obviously, I have no recollection of this person. I've never even heard of him.
Even I don't.
But if you look at the Pro Bowl list, only Steve Tasker, Andre Reed, Reuben Brown, Billy Shaw, and Bruce Smith have more Pro Bowl selections than Mike Stratton as a linebacker. Again, early in the 60s here.
Yeah.
And then as a 3-time first-team All-Pro, only O.J., Billy Shaw, and Bruce Smith have more All-Pros there. Again, we wanted to also maybe throw in some guys that people actually maybe ever saw or have heard of.
Right.
So that's where I didn't even really put him into the mix. I had a list here on my pad of paper of 24, 25 guys. Again, we came to an easy consensus on 12, and some of the other guys on the list that I'm fine with leaving off were Taron Johnson, Tre'Davious White, Matt Milano, Eric Wood, Joe Cribbs, and Jim Richard. Like, I'll let you discuss those guys. But
and Jerry Butler, wide receiver for the Bills. See, so where I came in was trying to help out with the fact that I'm about 10 years older than you. I remember the Bills in the late 70s, early 80s, before Jim Kelly and them got there. That's why Joe Ferguson is on there. Like, my three favorite players when it came to the Buffalo Bills as a kid was Joe Cribbs, Jerry Butler, Joe Ferguson. And Joe Cribbs had some great seasons with the Bills as a running back. Monster seasons. Jerry Butler, a really good wide receiver, John, when wide receiver wasn't that big of a role for your team, but ultimately, like, they just didn't stack up at the end of the day for what, like, I could literally, if I wanted to, do a bracket on just wide receivers who have played for the Bills, but I didn't do that. I was fair. I let everyone else in. As the bracket goes along, though, you'll see that I'm a jerk, and there's certain things that I take into consideration that pushes some of your accolades aside as far as what you meant to the team.
Jason J. giving us some comments on YouTube, and thank you. Continue to do that. And anyone else who wants to chime in here live as we tape this around lunchtime here on Thursday, saying Deion Dawkins at 16 is rough. And I'll admit, Jason, it was between him and Matt Milano.
Yep.
And I think we went more, again, with the Deion's made 3 Pro Bowls. Milano has been a first-team All-Pro once, and I believe made 1 Pro Bowl as well. That's where you could say, all right, Milano has really maximized his draft position as a 5th-round pick, where Deion was a 2nd-round pick that they traded up for. So I think that's completely valid and fine. And I also agree, Jason, saying Tre'Davious White would have made this list if it not for the injuries.
I agree with
that. I
100%
agree. I mean, the guy was a first-team All-Pro, probably would have been in the annual Pro Bowl conversation had he remained healthy, to which, yeah, I mean, maybe he would have made it higher than Eric Moulds. I mean, he maybe would have been higher than just a 16 seed, with Tre'Davious officially signing, or reportedly, with the Rams. We'll just throw that out. There was some news we haven't discussed because we discussed it a couple days ago where he may go. One of those, I don't want to say cautionary tales, but the what-if tales, I think, of that will be discussed beyond a bracket will be Tre'Davious White and what could have been for him as an all-time great had it not been for 2 major injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're good with it, John, I'm ready to dive right into this right now.
Well, we have to discuss the seeding now, because that was the number one talking point here, and I think we should just give some. We explained why the best players versus their draft position, and we have to just at least give our reasoning behind why Josh Allen is an 8 seed.
There are Hall of Famers on this list.
7 Hall of Famers were drafted by the Bills that made this list.
Correct.
In my opinion, if you're a Hall of Famer, you're automatically above Josh Allen. And that does not diminish the talent of Josh Allen. I think you could certainly argue if it's who's the most talented, physically gifted, dynamic player the Bills have ever had. By all means, Josh Allen would probably be one of the highest seeds in there. And this is not a slight on Josh Allen. He's never even been a first-team All-Pro. He's never won an MVP. He's never even made a Super Bowl. That's fine. He's still so early in his career. The dude's in his prime. And some people passed judgment and said, well, if it wasn't for McDermott, he would have had all that stuff. I mean, okay, this is all a projection and whatnot here. But I just cannot. And maybe someone made a good point. If you want to value the quarterback position above offensive linemen, so if you think that, Joe DeLamielleure was a great player, he's a Hall of Fame guy, but as a quarterback, Josh Allen has spearheaded this new age of Bills football. But still, I'm not getting there. To be perfectly honest with you, Josh Allen hasn't accomplished more than some of the guys that are below him, but we understand the exercise and are willing to go as far as saying Josh Allen at this point is the greatest draft pick they've ever had, whose career did not conclude in being considered one of the greatest football players to ever play the game.
A lot of what you're saying right now leading up to it is it's like you're inside my mind on how I approach this and how I looked at the matchups as we get ready to go. Because I did put a lot of consideration into my picks on positions. And when we start going through who picked what and where they go, at the end of the day, I often came down to, would the Bills still have been successful if they weren't on the team? Or could they have still been successful without them? And that's where I ended up on some of it, especially, John, as we get through the first round. I think the first round to you and I was pretty obvious. It'll be interesting to see, because I did not look at your picks. You emailed them to me. I just forwarded it to someone else. Haven't looked at it yet.
Nice.
We can dive into it now, and I'll start. So we'll do my bracket first. I'll give my reasoning. We'll do yours. And, of course, we have Bruce Smith versus Dion Dawkins. You mentioned this. Dion Dawkins, 3 Pro Bowls. Okay, no-brainer. Bruce Smith is a Hall of Fame, John. Bruce Smith also meant way more to, I think, the Bills' success. Leaps and bounds more. One of the best.
I don't think you need to convince. I think you should save your rationale for Bruce Smith for the next round.
It's pretty easy. Dion Dawkins.
Love him. Love you, Dion, but no way,
Love
brother.
Dion.
He would probably think we're crazy.
Yeah, so.
And Dion would admittingly say, I would love the challenge of facing Bruce Smith, but no freaking way.
So my bracket has Bruce Smith advancing, and you go, but I think we all know what your bracket's going to be.
Go next.
Bruce Smith, pretty easy.
Josh Allen for me.
Here's the next. Here's Josh Allen versus Reuben Brown. Again, Josh Allen, obviously, from what we talked about before. And again, I'll say with Reuben Brown, all the accolades that you get to Reuben Brown, a lot of 1,000-yard rushers were on the Bills when Reuben Brown was here with the Bills.
Categorically underrated and under-talked about as one of the best players post-Super Bowl run that this franchise has seen. Before my time, certainly. So I had to educate myself, and I didn't really know anything about Reuben when I got here. But then when you look back, 4 times he was a second-team All-Pro, and 8 times with the Bills, then ended up having 1 more with the Bears. A Pro Bowler. And yes, we understand now the Pro Bowl is a joke, but back when they were playing, it was taken with a little more credence and like, yeah, this is a big deal if you make the Pro Bowl back then. As I mentioned, when I'm looking at this list of the most Pro Bowls ever, Bruce Smith, Billy Shaw, and Reuben Brown are the top people with Pro Bowls in franchise history. That's incredible company. Not enough to beat Josh Allen, but he deserves his due.
All right, Josh Allen, Bruce Smith, for both of us are moving on. That takes us to the next one. Billy Shaw versus, I can't say Butch Bird. I just did.
All right, for those who don't know, who are you taking?
Butch.
Okay, so do you want to make the case for why you're picking Butch then? I was just going to maybe educate people because I don't know if they maybe even know who Butch Bird is.
Okay, so he is in the Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame. Okay. That much I can tell you, John. All-time leader in interceptions for the team with 40, which is something that really stands out to me. Won 2 AFL championships with the Bills and was a key part on those wins. 5 all-AFL teams. And as a Bill, started 101 consecutive games. That is why I'm picking him to move on, because I think he played a big role in the Bills winning AFL championships, whereas you have Billy Shaw, who was an offensive lineman. This is the category where I think the Bills could have won AFL championships without Billy Shaw, despite all of his accolades.
All right, I'm going Billy Shaw. I just can't, and I go back to this. Bruce Smith is the most first-team All-Pros in franchise history. Billy Shaw's next. He had 5. So 5 times, Billy Shaw, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66. So for 5 straight years, he was in an era where you run the snot out of the football. He was considered one of the best players to set the table for those who are running. 8 Pro Bowls, second most in franchise history. The position isn't sexy. It's a long time ago, and a lot of people who are filling out these brackets, this one, they probably didn't see or know much about either of them except for Billy Shaw's name is on the Wall of Fame and things like that. But I'm going to go with Billy Shaw, a Hall of Famer.
Okay. I couldn't get there with it, so I have the Buffalo Hall of Famer ahead of him, John. Thurman Thomas, Darryl Talley, teammates, both huge roles on the success of the Bills in the 90s, but you can't not go with Thurman Thomas here. This was just a no-brainer to me. Again, Hall of Famer versus non-Hall of Famer. Thurman, pass game, run game, he could do it all.
Another one of these things where because I've been here 10 years, but while I watched the 90s teams from afar, I didn't know their complete context for someone like Darryl. I knew he was a fan favorite and the Spider-Man and all of that. All-time leader in franchise history in tackles. So, again, a great player, but Thurman Thomas is certainly in the conversation. Draft pick, free agent signing, trade, however, as one of the greatest Bills of all time.
Yeah, okay, so now we go to the other side of the bracket, and we have Jim Kelly versus 15 seed Joe Ferguson. And again, I said this earlier, John. Joe Ferguson was one of my favorite players as a little kid at like 10 years old. Sears used to sell toy NFL players with blank jerseys, but they gave you stickers you could put on them. I had number 12 on my little Bills jersey, but that other 12, John, of course, who came in after Joe Ferguson, breaks all of Joe Ferguson's record. Hall of Fame quarterback, Jim Kelly, no-brainer in the first round.
Yeah, and this is an easy one because it's the same position. And while the eras are different, Jim broke all of Joe Ferguson's records. Just like at some point down the line, we will be able to have the conversation truly of Josh Allen versus Jim Kelly for greatest quarterback in franchise history because their numbers will be next to each other while also taking into account the new era, different eras, I should say. Here's an interesting one.
Okay, this is one of the more controversial ones, John. Joe DeLamielleure versus Kyle Williams.
Is it controversial because of the way you're saying it? Isn't it Joe DeLamielleure?
Yes,
okay.
It is. Joe DeLamielleure. My apologies.
Hey, you've been here longer, so you might have seen Joe D play. I didn't.
All right, John. I went with Kyle Williams.
Oh, you're a man of the people.
Case.
You are a man of the people. The fan vote. This was Kevin and I were texting after I put the polls out, and I go, you do realize that Kyle Williams is going to smoke Joe DeLamielleure.
Right.
And 72.5% to 27.5%, Kyle, the fans voted over 400 people, and they picked it. I'm sorry. Like, maybe you could say I'm a prisoner of the statistics. Kyle was great. He was a great, he was a very good player.
He was a great player during a crappy time for the Bills.
And he was acknowledged for his play beyond just being a very good player on a bad team by the amount of times he made the Pro Bowl as a guy who wasn't putting up like monster numbers like 10-plus sacks like interior guys can and do now.
Mm-hmm.
But he was just clearly well thought of and understood and appreciated around the league and the voting. But again, Joe DeLamielleure is in the stinking Pro Football Hall of Fame. I can't get there. This is one, though, where Kyle as a fifth-round pick and Joe D as a first-round pick, if you want to say, all right, my mind is in the what did you maximize the return on investment? Maybe you can get there, but I still can't. If you're a Hall of Famer versus a non-Hall of Famer, it's a wrap for me. I'm going Hall of Fame. So Joe D.
I'm that guy who likes the sexy pick, John. If you notice, I can't force an offensive lineman forward. I just can't do it. It's not in the cards for me. So Kyle Williams it is for me. I pull the upset. We have O.J. Simpson versus Eric Moulds, John. This one online was closer than I thought it would be, and I think we know why. You and I take what O.J. did post-playing career
out of the equation.
Yes. Totally.
Yes.
And I know people in their minds, probably a lot of people out there can't get past it.
Which is perfectly fine. I would not be critical of anyone who does that whatsoever.
Which makes sense. So I said it's fair, but at the end of the day, there's a reason why O.J. Simpson is up there. I have him moving on, John. Of course, we all know what he did. The only player to rush for 2,000 yards in a 14-game season. So with the schedule now longer, that's going to stand forever where he stands with that. And he was the Bills offense at a time when the Bills couldn't throw the ball. You knew OJ was getting the ball, and he still did what he did.
And let's be honest, in the way the game is played now, even if with 17 games, I don't know how often you're going to see 2,000 rushers in general.
Right.
Moving forward, and you haven't seen many just in totality in the league. And then to put into context, he did it in 14 games. The fans went 68.3 for OJ, 31.7 for Moulds. I agree. Eric Moulds a great player for the Bills. To get that much votes, that many votes,
was impressive.
Was impressive.
You took O.J. Simpson, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, last match of the first round, Andre Reed versus Fred Smerlas we went with in this one, John. 11 years with the Bills, and he wasn't your prototypical defensive lineman, but he wreaked havoc for a long time for the Buffalo Bills, had a huge role. But again, I know it's funny. You probably hate that I bounce back and forth on this. But Andre Reed, now I'm saying you're a Hall of Famer. There's no way anyone's beating you. But Andre Reed, not just a Hall of Famer to me, John. 15 years with the Bills and was a huge part of the K-Gun offense.
Yeah, he was awesome. You can give the appropriate due, as like we did with Reuben Brown and some of these other players, like for Fred Smerlas, and say you were a first-team All-Pro, a second-team All-Pro. You made 5 Pro Bowls into the 80s. But Andre Reed is a pillar of the franchise. If you did a Mount Rushmore, he's up there. So that one's easy. Now we get to the fun.
Now we get to, here we go. Bruce Smith, Josh Allen, John, is the matchup in round number 2. And it, plain and simply to me, I started talking about it off the top. You correctly cut me off because I could have talked for a while. But Bruce Smith, Hall of Famer, one of the most dominant defensive linemen ever to play the game, a huge part of the Bills' success. Josh Allen's still a work in progress. We don't know what the future holds for the Bills quarterback. He's been great for the start of his career. Last 4 years, I think he's been over 4,000 yards passing, let alone the fact that he runs the ball and is a huge part of the Bills' run game. But Bruce Smith, there's no denying, he's one of the best players at his position to ever take the field. I have Bruce Smith moving on to the next round over Josh Allen. So Josh Allen is done for me.
Yes, and this is the way it should be. I'm sorry. Josh Allen is an incredibly talented player. He's super fun to watch. He is absolutely the reason since 2018, if you want to start at 2019 after his rookie season, the Bills have made the playoffs as many times as they have won the division the way that they have. You can try to parse and say, well, he could have won MVP. He should have beat Lamar Jackson this year. I'm telling you, if he had one MVP, he still hasn't accomplished more than Bruce Smith. Bruce Smith is the all-time leader in the history of football in sacks. He is the number 1 on the list. Who has more sacks in the history of the league?
200 sacks.
Nobody. Nobody has more sacks than him. That 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 11-time Pro Bowler, 8 first-team All-Pros. I mean, if you're talking about a bracket of the greatest football players ever, regardless of teams, if you're even going to 16, I think you could make a case Bruce Smith is on that list. It is not an indictment or knocking Josh Allen, but 60.4% of fans who voted Josh Allen over Bruce Smith are drunk on recency bias, and it's absurd.
100%.
I'm sorry. It's just like it's wild to me. Do I think, and I think, let's say things even play out as dream scenario for the rest of Josh Allen's career with the Bills. Like, what does he have to do to surpass Bruce Smith at the end of the day, just overall. Like, to me, he has to win a Super Bowl. I mean, I think that alone would maybe carry weight over anyone if that. But beyond that, I mean, he could win 3 MVPs, I guess, or he wins 2 MVPs. Like, does he have to finish top 5 all time in passing yards or total touchdowns? Like, you have to be considered in the conversation, like Dan Marino.
He has to do all that and win a Super Bowl, like everything, and win a Super Bowl.
100%. I will, and this had over 1,400 votes. Shout out to our pal Bruce Nolan, who retweeted this last night, because it backfired on me, Kevin, and I texted you. I was hoping that if I get a push in votes, that people will come to their senses and say, I'm going to bring Bruce Smith closer to Josh Allen. And instead, it went the opposite direction. But 1,400 votes, and 60% of them think Josh Allen is better than Bruce Smith.
That's crazy to me, but then again, guys my age don't spend much time on Twitter polls. So I think that has a factor. Butch Bird versus Thurman Thomas in the next round, another no-brainer for me, John. I mean, we've already said all that needs to be said really about Thurman Thomas. I have him moving on, Hall of Famer. John, I love the stats on his rushing and his receiving when you look at him over 12 seasons. 65 touchdowns on the ground, 22 in the air. And like we said about Andre Reed, that Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, Thurman is an easy winner here. And the people agree on this one. Thurman, I had Billy Shaw versus Thurman, and that's what the people had. And Thurman got 96.5% over Billy Shaw. Poor Billy Shaw.
Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Jim Kelly versus Kyle Williams. Here's where Kyle Williams' Cinderella story, to me, John, comes to a screeching halt going up against Jim Kelly, Hall of Fame quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in that group of 80s guys with Marino, Elway. I'm blanking on.
You could even maybe throw Warren Moon in there. I mean, he was later.
Warren Moon and stuff. Jim Kelly, just such a key piece to all the success. It's pretty easy to have him moving on to the next round.
I had Jim Kelly versus Joe DeLamielleure, and Jim. I mean, again, when you look at the bracket, I know it was seeded certain ways, but I mean, you kind of knew the collision course, at least to get to the Final Four of where this was going. I'm going Jim Kelly.
Yeah, so that brings us to O.J. Simpson versus Andre Reed, John. This one I had to stick with O.J. Just because of what I said in the first round is what he was. He was the Buffalo Bills of the 70s, and all of his accomplishments with what Andre Reed meant to the Bills, O.J. Simpson meant that much more to the Bills in the 70s.
And maybe this isn't fair, but for me with O.J., he won an MVP, a 5-time first-team All-Pro, so he was unequivocally, at times in his career, at his peak, considered the very best player at his position in all of football. As great and Hall of Fame career as Andre Reed had, it was partially the times, because it was flooded with really good wide receivers, like a golden age of the Jerry Rice, Tim Brown, those types of guys of your Art Monk. Like, you're not overlooked, but you're just in this bucket. So,
dude, in the AFC East alone back then, you had Mark Duper and Mark Clayton in Miami. You had Al Toon and Wesley Walker with the Jets. They were good. You had Stanley Morgan and Irving Fry with the Patriots. In the AFC East alone, you had
James Lofton and Reed.
James Lofton and Andre Reed. You had those dynamic guys everywhere. Andre Reed stood out. He's also playing when Jerry Rice was playing.
Right, so it's Chris Carter's probably a little bit in that bucket a little later. But, yes, it's nothing against Andre. And, again, at this point, we're not saying they weren't good. But I'm going with O.J. Simpson. This was the best and closest vote we had of any of these matchups that I put out on social media. Literally came down to the final 30 minutes this morning when I woke up. and made one final push. 779 votes, 51.6%. Andre Reed, OJ 48.4. So our opinions and our picks edged out in the public's eyes.
Okay, so that takes us to the final four here. Bruce Smith and Thurman Thomas going head-to-head in this one. Both players on the team of the 90s, both players in the Hall of Fame, both players, huge role in that team's success, John. But again, Bruce Smith, I'm not going to repeat it over and over again, but just too good of a player, too important, that I'm sorry, he's edging out his teammate for me, Thurman Thomas.
Yeah, we've made the case for Bruce, and that's why I'm going with Bruce in the final as well. I think if you're talking about accomplishments and just overall impact, these may be, with Bruce and Thurman, may actually be the top two. They just fell on the same side of the bracket. Like, I think you could make a case that in totality, Thurman Thomas maybe accomplished or was a better player than O.J. Simpson. Now, you could make that. And I think you could make the case that as great as Jim Kelly is and the quarterback position matters the most, Thurman's the one who won an MVP while Jim Kelly was his quarterback. But ultimately, with this matchup, I'm going Bruce over Thurman.
Yeah. So that brings us to Jim Kelly, O.J. Simpson. To me, John, this was pretty easy. Jim Kelly easily gets it over O.J. Simpson, just for everything we've already talked about. As much as I have sat here and said O.J. Simpson was the Bills of the 70s, you look at the Bills of the 90s, Jim Kelly probably the face of the franchise there. I have him moving on to face Bruce Smith, John. So it's Bills of the 90s, offense versus defense for me.
Not for me. I know I just made the case that Thurman could potentially be considered a more accomplished player than O.J. Simpson in Bills history. But O.J. Simpson, in my opinion, I know the positions are different, but I think O.J. Simpson is like a top 25, top 30 guy in league history, similar to Bruce Smith, talent-wise, accomplishments-wise. And I know we spoke to it off the top. I think a lot of that just gets forgotten, pushed aside, overlooked, or just nobody cares because of all that we know of O.J. Simpson of the past 25-plus years.
Yeah.
So for me, I think I'm going to go, and this certainly will not be popular. I look forward to your comments of this. I'm going with O.J. versus Bruce in the final. And before we get to this, for those watching on YouTube, why did you pick that picture of Bruce? What is he doing?
I love it, John. It's a bracket. Have some fun with it. He's happy.
Is that happy? I don't even know what that is.
That's happy Bruce after the comeback, I think, or one of those games, one of those playoff games. I love it, dude. The little heads are great. So let's get to the final matchup, John. I have Bruce Smith versus Jim Kelly. Again, my bias would take over in this, that I kind of went by position, and would the Bills have been able to get to 4 Super Bowls and win 4 straight AFC championships without Jim Kelly or without Bruce Smith? Now I know what you're going to say. Frank Reich stepped in
I was not gonna say
for the
that's so
comeback game, so that could prove my point wrong. But I think, sometimes you catch lightning in a bottle. We'll say maybe the Oilers got way too comfortable in the comeback game. Not to crap on anything Frank Reich did. I think there was a Don Beebe touchdown where he actually stepped out of bounds before he caught the ball. Not that I've watched this game ad nauseum, but I just think quarterback, Jim Kelly, you talk about Josh Allen turning a franchise around. Bills were no great shake before Jim Kelly showed up. I have the big man, Jim Kelly, quarterback, taking it all. Best Bills draft pick ever.
I was wondering how this graphic was going to go with choosing the winner. I thought Jim would eat Bruce or something, or knock his head off or something like that.
I mean, we only had a few days.
All right,
put
I like the big face of Jim, especially since we can slide the big face of Bruce Smith over for me. The case has been stated by me. I just
look at that smile.
I think in the history of the National Football League, and if you even want to go a little bit farther, which I know like the NFL 100, that great series where I will say it, Bill Belichick was incredible television and his knowledge and talking about the history of the game. I don't know where Bruce fell. He was on that list, but I just think his place in the totality of football in its history as in the professional realm is just unmatched for anyone this organization has ever seen. And even to the point where his career ended, early 2000s. We're now 20-plus years later, and there's been great pass rushers. Von Miller certainly is one of them, but they're not Bruce Smith.
Right.
And just also think of the physicality, the rules difference, and the way they were not throwing the same volume that they are now to where imagine if Bruce Smith played in this day and age and he's still got 200 sacks. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, just everything about him, his physical freakness and just everything about Bruce was incredible. And again, this was like the really infancy of my football fandom, and I wasn't even here in Buffalo, but I was well aware, especially when I'd pick him as the first guy in the defensive line in Super Tecmo Bowl. Man, did he dominate. I'd do like one, which would be in like an 8-bit world, a swim move, and then I would just dive at the quarterback. Bruce had like 100 sacks in one season for me. So I'm going Bruce Smith over O.J. Simpson as the Bills' best draft pick ever.
Okay, I have Jim Kelly. You have Bruce Smith. I'm sure the Bills Mafia will have Josh Allen.
Yes, because you talk about Frank Reich. I put out the poll for the Final Four about 4+ hours ago at this point, and Josh is at 80% over Thurman, and Jim Kelly is at 73% over Andre Reed. It would take a Frank Reich times 1,000 comeback for either Thurman Thomas or Andre Reed to win. So we're going to conclude this on my social media at Jon Scott TV, on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, on Friday, so the day after this is getting posted. You can vote. We said this. You throw Josh Allen in any poll,
right,
he's going to win. He won the best trade bracket because we kind of had to finagle the rules of that because the Bills traded for the pick to draft him. Listen, nothing against Josh, but even if it gets down to Josh versus Jim, I got to take Jim. Jim's totality of his career. We're not talking about projections. We're not talking about talent. We're talking about what did you accomplish for the franchise in your career as a whole. And Jim's career was twice as long, and he's accomplished in turn much more than Josh Allen did. And I know we discussed it. What would Josh Allen need to do to pass Bruce Smith? Let's just have that conversation now because we both agree Jim should be the pick over Josh.
Correct.
Currently, what do you think would have to change and Josh would have to accomplish? Is it simply the Super Bowl?
If he continues on the arc he's on, I think eventually he gets an MVP in there. What he's putting up numbers-wise there, the fact that he's a dual-threat quarterback there, the fact that he changed this franchise or was part of the change of this franchise there. Getting to a Super Bowl doesn't do it for me, John. Getting to 2 Super Bowls and losing doesn't do it. He needs to win one of the Super Bowls and blow Jim Kelly out in all these other categories, but also win a Super Bowl, not just get there. And I think 1 Super Bowl is fine. I think you win the 1 with all the other stats and all the other accolades aside. You get it. I think, staying on the same path and just getting to a Super Bowl, I don't know if that puts him above Jim Kelly for me.
Yeah, I mean, his numbers, and part of it is, I think, Josh just being incredibly talented. Also, the difference in eras. Josh's numbers will blow Jim's out of the water by the time all things are said and done. So that's where you go and you say, all right, you have to go to the people that watched both. I think, to be fair. And you would be someone like that. Again, I was born in 84, so the heyday of the Bills was, the formidable beginning portion of my football watching. The first Super Bowls I remember were like the first ones, the Giants and things like that. So to me, it would be, I think Jim would probably even say or has said that he thinks Josh is more talented than he was.
Right.
But you have to put the talent and succeed and do things to that. And we're not beholden to awards. It's not like Josh has to have this award versus Jim and all of that. There is some factor, I think, of the eye test, which is fair. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about a resume and you're comparing resume to resume here, I agree with you. Because Jim made it to 4 Super Bowls, it's not something where you can simply say, oh, Josh got him to 2. It's about he has to win 1. He could go to 1 and win 1.
Right.
And for anyone that's associated with this organization, if this team wins, they automatically vault up in the pantheon of the history of the Buffalo Bills. As a Cleveland guy, I look at it in the same vein of LeBron wins a championship for the Cavaliers. 1 championship in Cleveland carries more weight, and maybe I'm biased, than another one for the Lakers in the bubble or 2 with a super team in Miami. He did it with an organization that never won anything. And I think with Josh, to finally get this team to the promised land that they've never been to, and that would be hoisting the Lombardi Trophy, I think that is the step that Josh could take and needs to take to unequivocally grab claim to most important best player in franchise history, regardless of what the criteria is.
I agree 100%. So Josh Allen, you might not like his seed. You might not like the fact he didn't make it to the championship or the fact that he's not the champion. But, John, again, we do this early enough in Josh Allen's career where maybe when Josh Allen retires, you and I will get together and reset up this bracket.
And this is also where YouTube or wherever you're listening on podcast platforms or social media or whatever, comment. Give us your thoughts, because we know you don't agree with everything that we just said or just did or our reasoning or any of that stuff. But Kevin informed me, I'm not a Reddit guy, that there's a pretty deep and long thread on Reddit of people discussing this. This is fun. While you're watching some of these tournament games, women's basketball, men's basketball, the hockey, whatever it is this weekend that you're watching, you're hanging out with your friends, look at the bracket. Fire up the pod and just have the discussion amongst yourselves and drop your thoughts and comments wherever you can, because we'll respond, we'll read them, we'll see it, and that's what this exercise is about. It's why we thought it'd be a great idea for the month.
Yeah,
and we think this one of the previous, of all 3 that we've done, this one the best, the most fun to discuss, and that's we're gonna, I guess, bracket month of March. We're going to end with a bang.
Yeah, so that's it for the brackets, John. The NFL draft next up on the calendar as we inch closer to that. So moving forward, of course, the Bills still making moves and doing stuff in free agency, and there's always Bills news and NFL news out there. But that's to come as we inch closer to the NFL draft. So for Jon Scott, I'm Kevin Carroll. As always, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Bruce!